Hello friends. Now in the previous session we have discussed about the Insecticide Act under the title Safety, Health and Environment Legislation, and in that Insecticide Act we have discussed various points like the different definitions under that act, then approximately 38 sections under that act, then one schedule, then central board, how it is to be formed, who are the members, what is the eligibility criteria for that membership, which department of the central government they are going to present, why exactly the need of that particular department representative in that board, then registration is required for the manufacturing, importing, storing, packing, all activities which is related to the insecticide. So that needs a registration process, and for that purpose the registration committee is appointed by the central government only, and there are again different guidelines regarding to that central government registration committee. So almost 5 members were there for the registration committee. Then there is a appointment of licensing officer for giving the license to the applicants or the persons or the organizations who are interested in taking the license for the different activities which is come under the manufacture definition for this insecticide act. And then what are the different powers of the state government, central government, then some of the persons like license officer, insecticide inspector, insecticide analyst, etc. So there are various members, various officers, inspectors, etc. for minimizing the risk of insecticides to the human being as well as to the animals. So there are various points which has mentioned under this insecticide act, which is related to the insecticide manufacturing, storing, packing, inspection, rejection, cancellation of the registration or the certificate, etc. Now there is one section who clearly defines that state government can make their rule under the guidance or the directives of the central government. So we will discuss about the insecticide rule 1971 under that section. So that section is section 36 of the Insecticide Act 1968. So with reference to this section 36 of this act, the state government can make the rules. So insecticide rule 1971 have various chapters and approximate 45 or 46 rules under that. The chapter 1 is related to the preliminary, that is clearly mentioned the short title and commencement of that insecticide rule. Then different definitions covered under the rule number 2, and then in the second chapter it is focusing on the functions of the board, registration committee and the laboratories. So whatever we have discussed in the insecticide act, that central board should be there, there is some registration committee should be appointed, some members should be appointed, and the central board laboratory facility should be there. So all these things are now for the state government activities. So that is covered under chapter 2, that functions of the board, functions of the registration, then functions of the laboratory. Then chapter 3 of these rules focusing on the registration of the insecticides. So that is the manner of registration, what exactly the process, what is the appeal facility for the applicant, then manner of publication of refusal to register or cancellation of the certificate of registration. All these are related to the registration activities. So that is covered under chapter 3. Then chapter 4 is related to the grant of licenses. So the persons or the organizations who is interested or willing to manufacture, willing to do some of the activities like packaging, then labeling, selling, distributing, etc. related to the insecticide, then they can go for the licensing. So the license to the manufacture insecticides, license for sale, then segregation and disposal of date expired pesticides, special provision with regard to sulfur, prohibition against sale or storage of insecticide in certain places, then duration of licenses, conditions of license, varying or amending the license, transfer of license, issuing cash memo and maintenance of records. So all the activities which is related to the license facility is covered under chapter 4. Then chapter 5 is related to the packing and labeling. So whatever the insecticides you have manufactured, that should be packed in a specific box, bottle or some other packaging devices, and that should be labeled with reference to these guidelines. So the prohibition of sale or distribution unless packed or labeled, packing of insecticides, leaflet to be contained in a package. So that leaflet gives you the idea regarding that product, what exactly the product contains, what is the concentration of that chemical, what is the application, how to use in case of incident or accident, or in case of contact to the skin, eyes or some other body parts, what should be done. All these things is given in that leaflet. So that leaflet should be contained in a package. Then the manner of labeling, how to do the labeling, what are the guidelines, then prohibition against altering inscriptions, etc. on containers, labels or wrappers of insecticides. So these are the different rules which are related to the packing and labeling, which is covered under chapter 5. Then chapter 6 is related to the insecticide analyst and insecticide inspectors. So the qualification of insecticide analyst, then the powers of insecticide analyst, duties of insecticide analyst, then procedure on receipt of sample, fees payable for testing or analysis, qualification of insecticide inspector, duties of insecticide inspector, duties of inspectors, specially authorized to inspect the manufacturing facilities of these insecticides, then prohibition of disclosure of information, form of order not to dispose of stock, prohibition of sale, form of receipt for seized insecticides, then form of intimation for the purpose of taking samples, dispatch of samples for test and analysis. So these are the different parameters which are covered under the chapter 4, which is related to the insecticide analyst and inspectors. Then chapter 7 is related to the transport and storage of insecticides in transit by rail, road or water. So what should be the manner of packing, how to do the packing, store while in transit by the rail facility. Then conditions to be specified for storage of insecticides, then medical examinations, which is the criteria or the parameters involved under chapter 7. Then chapter 8 is related to the provision regarding the protective clothing, equipment and other facilities for workers, manufacturers, etc. of insecticide. So this is nothing but the related to the precautionary measures. Then first aid measures, protective clothing, respiratory devices, manufacturer, etc. to keep sufficient quantities of antidotes and first aid medicines. Then chapter 8, under that training of workers, area spraying operations, disposal of used package, surplus materials and washing of insecticides. So all these things are related to the protective clothing and facilities for workers. Then chapter 9 is miscellaneous. So whatever the points which is not covered under the chapter 8 or the 44 rules, that should be covered under the rule number 45 and 46. That is places at which the insecticides may be imported, traveling and other allowances payable to the members of the board, etc. So these are the 46 rules and 9 chapter which is covered under the Insecticide Rule 1971. So we will discuss in brief one by one. So under chapter 1, in preliminary, there are various definitions. So few of the definitions are like expiry date. So it is very important to have an expiry date clearly mentioned on the container, label or wrapper against the column, that is date of expiry. So after that date, we should not use these insecticides. So the properties of that insecticide or the chemicals are going to change after the date of expiry. Then form means a form set out in the first schedule. So form is related to the first schedule contents. Then the pest means any insect, rodent, fungi, weeds and other forms of plant or animal life not useful to human beings. So that is why this pest is going to control by the human beings, because they are not useful to the human beings, and that is why we are going to use pesticides, means to kill these pests like insect, rodent, fungi, weeds, etc. Then the primary package means immediate package containing the insecticides. Principal means the importer or manufacturer of that insecticides. That is nothing but the owner or the responsible person for importing that insecticide or for manufacturing of that insecticide. Then rural area means an area which falls outside the limits by any municipal corporation or municipal committee. That is called as rural area. Then secondary package means a package which is neither a primary package nor a transportation package. So this is the primary and this is secondary package. Then the testing facility. So we have already discussed about this testing laboratories, testing facility that should be carried out in relation to the submission of data on product quality or on safety or in efficacy or in residues or on stability in shortage of the insecticide for which the application for registration is made. So if the registration application is there, in case if you want to check, if you want to test that facility, if you want to test that product, if you want to have some doubts regarding that product's quality, or if the insecticide inspectors wants to test that product for any mean, then they can go for the testing, and these facility for testing these products are called as testing facility. Then transportation package means the outermost package used for transportation of insecticide. Then rule number 3 is related to the functions of the board under chapter 2, that is function of board, registration committee and laboratories. So the board shall, in addition to the function assigned by this act, carry out the following functions. The functions are advise the central government on the manufacture of insecticide under the Industries Act 1951, then specify the use of classification of insecticides on the basis of their toxicity as well as their being suitable for aerial applications. So the board should clearly classify these insecticides on the basis of their toxicity. So that may be a low toxic material, that may be a moderate toxic material, that may be a high toxic material, etc. So depending on the lethal dose, that is in terms of LC50, LD50 values, etc., that should be decided by these board members. Advise tolerance limits for insecticides, residues, and an establishment of minimum intervals between the application of insecticides and harvest in respect of various commodities. So board's responsibility or the function is to advise the tolerance limit for the insecticides. It is not a good practice to apply the high volume or high quantity of insecticides on a routine basis, on a daily basis, and with short intervals. So whatever the insecticides you are going to apply in the different area, that may be for the farming, that may be for the gardening or for other purposes, you have to check what exactly the tolerance limits are mentioned under that products leaflet. Specify the shelf life of insecticides. Then suggest colorization, including coloring matter which may be mixed with concentrates of insecticides, particularly those of highly toxic nature. So we have to decide the colors, especially indirectly. From that color only, you can understand whether this material or insecticide is highly toxic or not. Then carry out such other functions as are supplemental, incidental, or consequential to any of the functions conferred by the Act or these rules. So these are the different functions of the board, indirectly the board members. Then rule number 4 is related to the functions of registration committee. So we already discussed about that. For the licensing authority, for the getting the license, we have to apply for the registrations, and the registration is committee is going to decide to accept the registration, to cancel the registration, or to reject the registration. So depending on the facilities, depending on the detailed information you have given in the application, depending on that only, they are going to decide the registration acceptance. So this is carried out by the different committee members. Then functions of laboratories. So we have already discussed again that the inspector or the analyst can do the analysis part, or can order or ask to do the analysis part to the assistant in the specific laboratories which is funded by the central government funding, or sometimes it can be a state government funding. So depending on the facilities to be created in that particular area, central and state government are going to decide, they are going to permit the different laboratory and different facilities or equipment facilities under that laboratory for the analysis of the insecticide or their products. So taking the samples, transporting the samples, or having the different insecticide residues by the inspector or analyst may be the cases. All these things are tested in the laboratory, and all these should be done with respect to a particular time bound activity, that is the function of that laboratory. Then under chapter 3, that is registration of insecticides. So rule number 6 clearly mention about the manner of registration, and under that 6A, issue of duplicate certificate of registration. So the fee is applicable for the duplication purpose, because the registration, how to apply that, if the registration is accepted by that registration committee, then you will have the certificate of registration. But in case if you damage that certificate of registration or lost the registration certificate, then you can also apply for the duplicate certificate of registration with some nominal fees. Then rule number 7 is related to the appeal. So in case if the registration committee decided to reject the application for the registration or cancel the registration due to some reasons under the section 9, then they may give the explanation about why this registration application is cancelled or rejected by these members, and if these reasons are not accepted by the applicant, then applicant can go for the appeal for getting the registration by clearing the doubts of that registration committee. So whatever the fees payable for that appealing purpose, that should be paid by that applicant only. Then rule number 8 is related to the manner of publication of refusal to register or cancellation of the certificate of registration. So we already talked in the act also that registration committee members are having the powers to cancel the registration or to reject or refuse the registration of that person or the organizations. So depending on the condition, depending on the facilities, and depending on the cross checking by the registration committee, they are going to cancel or refuse the application. Then chapter 4 is related to the grant of licenses. So under that, rule number 9 is related to the license to the manufacturer insecticides, and 10 is related to the license for sale, etc. of insecticides. So under the 10, there are sub rules, that is 10A is related to the segregation and disposal of date expired pesticides. 10B is related to the special provisions with regard to sulfur, and 10C is related to the prohibition against sale or storage of insecticides in a certain places. So from the title of these sub rules clearly indicates that what exactly the objective of that rule is. So in case of expired pesticides are there, then how to segregate it, how to separate out it, how to dispose it, these are the guidelines provided under rule number 10A. And then they are going to decide whether to continue this license or not. So clearly mentioning not for sale, not for use, not for manufacture, etc. Clearly showing that these insecticides or pesticides are expired one, and that should not be used or reused in the routine activities. Then this related to sulfur, in regard to the insecticide sulfur and its formulations, all licenses shall observe all precautions to prevent its theft. Then report any such theft to the nearest police authorities promptly, and maintain a separate register showing names, addresses of all the persons to whom it has been sold or distributed, and the quantities to be sold or distributed. So that is related to the sulfur and their concern. Then in case due to some more exposure or due to some storage limitations, due to some permissions for the sale, etc., if there are some insecticide which has to be prohibited by the central or state government, then they can decide by their own that this is the prohibited insecticides, and all these prohibited insecticide should not be sold or stored by the licensing authority. Then 11 is duration of licenses, that is normally for the 3 years. Then 12 is conditions of licenses. So all the facilities, all the concentrations, all the guidelines should be followed by that licensee. That is the conditions. Then 13 is related to the varying or amending a license. So if you want to renew that license, if in case of due to some reasons, if the license is cancelled, then again you have to apply for the new license with all the conditions. Then transfer of license is not applicable. Then issuing cash memo and maintenance of all these records. So whatever the fees available, whatever the fees applicable, whatever the records which is related to the utilization, product manufacturing, the capacity, then selling, etc. All these records should be maintained by the license. Then chapter 5 is related to the packing and labeling. So it is again a mandatory condition to pack these insecticide in a proper way and to have the labels on this packing. So prohibition of sale or distribution unless pack and label. So if you are not going to pack these insecticides, if you are not going to label all these insecticides with a proper detailing of that insecticide, then the selling or distribution is not permitted. Then 17 is related to the packaging of insecticides. So every package containing the insecticide shall be of a type approved by the registration committee. So registration committee is going to guide you how to pack this insecticide, and depending on the type of insecticide, depending on the classification of insecticide, depending on the toxicity of insecticide, This registration committee is going to guide you that this particular symbol, this particular text, this particular number should be there on the labels of these packaging pesticides. Then before putting any insecticide into the primary package, every batch thereof shall be analyzed as per the relevant specifications of the manufacturer in accordance with the approved methods of analysis, and the result of such analysis shall be recorded in the register maintained for the purpose. So after analysis by the insecticide analyst, after inspection or observation by the insecticide inspector, and after getting the green signal for selling and distribution only, then and then only you have to pack these insecticides in the packaging material, and then you have to apply these labels. So then and then only you are going to distribute all these packaged insecticides with labels to the customers. Then rule number 18 is related to the leaflet. So I have already told you that with the primary package, and there is a leaflet that is clearly mentioned the different informations, what exactly this insecticide is, where to apply it, what are the different issues related to this insecticide in case of any accident, incident or contacts, then what should be done. So all these things are given in this leaflet. So the packaging of every insecticide shall include a leaflet, and the contents are the plant disease, insects and noxious animals or weeds for which the insecticide is to be applied. So this is the simple condition where we have to apply this insecticide. That is one of the information in this leaflet. The adequate direction concerning the manner in which the insecticide is to be used at the time of applications. So how to use it, that is another direction. Then particulars regarding the chemicals harmful to the human beings, animals and wildlife. Warning and cautionary statements including the symptoms of poisoning, suitable and adequate safety measures, emergency first aid treatment wherever necessary. So all these things are given in this leaflet. Sometimes it is the symptoms, sometimes it is the symbols, sometimes it is clearly mentioned that it is a poisonous material to the human beings or animals for this concentration. And in case if it is contacted to your body or to the animal's body, then what should be the first aid treatment. Cautions regarding storage and applications of insecticides with suitable warning related to the inflammable, explosive or other substance harmful to the skin. Normally many of the insecticides are harmful to the skin, some are harmful to the eyes, some are harmful to the respiration tract, and some insecticides are flammable in nature or explosive in nature. So depending on that, all these cautionary measures are mentioned in that leaflet. Instructions concerning the documentations of safety, the leaflets are added into that package. Then 19 is related to the manner of labeling. So how to do the labeling, that is one of the criteria which is clearly mentioned in the rule number 19. So the labeling may be in the written format, that may be in the printed format, and what exactly the guidelines, so we will check. So these are the guidelines that contents of that label should be a name of the manufacturer, right? So second one is name of the insecticide, then registration number of the insecticide, kind of active and percentage of. So we have to follow all. We should clearly mention the manufacturer's name, then insecticide's name, registration number and the ingredients of this insecticide with percentage. Then net content of volume, batch number, expiry date and antidote statement. So in case of indigestion, digestion, inhalation or through the skin, whatever may be the routes of entry. If accidentally, if insecticide is digested or inhaled by the person or animal, then what should be the antidote? So that antidote should be mentioned for the quick treatment. Then the label shall be so affixed to the container that it can't be ordinarily removed. So that label should be fixed in a proper way. Then the upper portion of the square referred in sub rule 3 shall contain the following symbols and warning statements. So that label should be contained with the symbols and the warning statements. So from that symbols and statements only we can understand what is the characteristics of this insecticide is. For example, insecticides belonging to category 1, that is extremely toxic, shall contain the symbol of a skull and crossbones, and the word is poison. So on that label, that poison word should be there, and it is a category 1 extremely toxic, and this poison should be printed in a red ink. The following warning statement shall also appear on the label at appropriate place outside the triangle. Then keep out the reach of children. That is the another statement that is called as warning statement. Then next one is if swallowed or if symptoms of poisoning occur, call physician immediately. That is another warning statement for this insecticide label. Then insecticides in category 2, that is highly toxic. The word is again poison in red. Then the warning statement are keep out of the reach of children and shall also appear on the label on the appropriate places. So this is the warning statement for this highly toxic category 2 poison material. Then third category is moderately toxic. Now instead of poison, the wording is danger. And the warning statement is same as per the category 1 and 2. Then category 4 is slightly toxic, and now the word is caution. So depending on the classification of these insecticide, that is in terms of category 1, 2, 3 and 4, extremely toxic, highly toxic, moderately toxic and slightly toxic. The wording are poison, poison, danger and caution. So these are the different guidelines given under this packing and labeling chapter under sub rule 3. So this is the table which clearly shows you the toxicity index or toxicity data, the classification of the insecticide: extremely toxic, highly toxic and moderately toxic and slightly toxic. So medium lethal dose by the oral route. So there are many different routes of entry. So if this insecticide is going into your body through the mouth, then it is called as oral route, that is acute toxicity, and LD 50 mg per kg value is given. So LD means lethal dose. It means if your body weight is 1 kg, then 50 milligram is sufficient for killing that person, and the chances of killing that person is 50%. So LD50 value, if there is LD50 value, then it is 50 mg per kg. So if your body weight is 50 kg, then we have to multiply this 50 mg by 50 again. So 50 into 50, whatever the output is there, that is the mg dose for that LD category medium lethal dose, right? So that is already tested for the animals. So if it is extremely toxic, then it is range in between 1 to 50. If it is highly toxic, then it is 51 to 500. If it is moderately toxic, then it is 501 to 5000. And if it is slightly toxic, then it is more than 5000. If the medium lethal dose by the dermal route, dermal means skin through. So if these insecticide are enter into your body through the skin, then the dermatoxicity, that is LD50 mg per kg body weight of test animals, is ranging from 1 to 200 for extremely toxic, from 201 to 2000 for highly toxic, 2001 to 20,000 for moderately toxic, and more than 20,000 for slightly toxic. And the color indication for this band, that is for extremely toxic, bright red; for highly toxic, bright yellow; moderately toxic, bright blue; and slightly toxic, bright green. So from the color coding also you can judge whether this insecticide is extremely toxic, or whether it is highly toxic, or it is moderately toxic, or slightly toxic. Then the labeling of insecticide must not bear any unwarranted claims for the safety of the producers or its gradients, the including statements such as safe, non-poisonous, non-injurious, harmless, with or without such qualified phrase as when used as directed. So most of the insecticides are poisonous or toxic in nature. So there is no point by giving such type of statement that may be a misleading to the consumer or the user. Then rule number 20 is related to the prohibition against altering inscriptions, etc. on containers, labels, or the wrappers of insecticide. So the clear-cut guidelines is given under this rule number 19, how to do the color coding, what exactly the wording should be there, what exactly the warning statement should be there, and which symbol should be used for the labeling purpose. So if you are not going to obey these guidelines, then that insecticide, that product may be prohibited by the state government or the central government representative. Then chapter 6 is related to the insecticide analysis and insecticide inspectors. So various functions, responsibilities and powers we have discussed in the Insecticide Act. Now some of the part are repeated in the Insecticide Rule 1971. So 21 number rule is related to the qualification of insecticide analyst. So a person shall be eligible for the appointment as an insecticide analyst under the act only if he possesses the following qualification. So for the insecticide analyst, the qualification is a graduate in agriculture or a graduate in science with chemistry as a special subject. Adequate training in analyzing insecticides in recognized laboratories. So these both conditions are essential for qualifying the eligibility as an insecticide analyst. Then powers of insecticide analyst. So power to call for such information of particulars or do anything as may be necessary for the proper examination of the samples. That is the power of insecticide analyst. Then duties of the insecticide analyst, whatever the samples, whatever the insecticide um, packages taken by that insecticide analysis, that should be analyzed by the insecticide analyst, and the report of the same should be submitted to the representative or the insecticide inspector within a given time. Then procedure on receipt of sample. In case inspector or analyst is taking the sample from a particular place, that may be a storage area, that may be a selling shop, etc. So whatever the price of that sample is, that should be paid by that insecticide analyst or inspector. Then fees payable for testing or analysis, that is another criteria. And 26 is related to the qualification of insecticide inspector. So previous one is insecticide analyst, now it is insecticide inspector. So the criteria is graduate in agriculture or graduate in science with chemistry as one of the subject, and adequate field experience. Now for the inspection purpose, you must have a field experience, and for the analyst, you must have the laboratory experience, because the job profile and the duties are a little bit different for the insecticide analyst as well as for the insecticide inspector. Then the duties of insecticide inspector: to inspect not less than 3 times in a year all establishments selling insecticides within the area, then to satisfy himself that the conditions of license are being complied, then to procure and send for test and analysis samples of insecticides which he has reason to suspect are being sold, stocked, or accepted for sale in contraventions of the provisions of the Act or rules. So he can anytime go to the particular site. So that may be a manufacturing facility, that may be a storage facility, that may be a distribution center, that may be a selling shop, etc. And then he can check whether all the guidelines are obeyed, organizer, or that if he has any doubt, then he can test the samples, he can analyze that sample for the quality check, for the toxicity check, for the labels, etc. Then duties of inspector: specially authorized to inspect manufacture of insecticides. So we have already discussed that at least 2 times he should visit the manufacturer facility for checking whether all these manufacturing steps, precautionary measures, safety measures are taken by that manufacturer or not. To draw the samples from the manufacturing facility, from that premises, he can test or analyze these samples taken from the manufacturing or premises, and then he can report to the government related to these analysis of the samples to the respective government. Then 29 is related to the prohibition of disclosure of informations. So except for the purpose of business, all the information can be disclosed to the public, disclosed to the inspector, disclosed to the state government, central government, etc. So all this information can be disclosed on the official sites also, depending on the condition. Rule number 30 is related to the form of order not to dispose of stock. So an order by the insecticide inspector requiring a person not to dispose of any stock in his possession shall be in the form 10. Then 31 is related to the prohibition of sale, and 32 is related to the form of receipt for seized insecticides. So a receipt by an insecticide inspector for the stock of any insecticide seized shall be in the form 11. Then 33 is form of intimation of purposes of taking samples. So if the inspector wants to take the samples from that site, then he can take that sample by filling or writing the form number 12. Then 34 rule number is related to the dispatch of samples for test or analysis. So after writing the details in the form 12, he can take the samples of that insecticide from that site and he can dispatch these samples for the testing purpose or for the analysis purpose in the central or state government laboratory. Then chapter 7 is related to the transport and storage of insecticide in transit by rail, road or water. So how to transport, what are the guidelines to transport or to these insecticides by the rail facility, road facility or by the water. So the manner of packing and storage while in transit by the road is given in rule number 35, that is packages containing insecticides offered for transport by rail shall be packed in accordance with the conditions specified in the rail tariff issued by the Ministry of Railways. So with reference to the guidelines given by the Ministry of Railways, they have to pack these insecticide in that manner. No insecticide shall be transported or stored in such way as to come into direct contact with foodstuffs or animal feeds. So these insecticides packing should be isolated from the foodstuff or animal feeds to avoid the contamination, to avoid the contact. No foodstuffs or animal feeds which got mixed up with the insecticide as a result of any damage to the packages containing insecticides during the transport or storage shall be released. So we should not use these foodstuffs or the animals' foods where these contamination of these insecticides may be possible. If any insecticide is found to have leaked out in the transport or storage, it shall be the responsibility of the transport agency or the storage owner to take such measure urgently to prevent the poisoning and pollution of the soil or water. So we have to avoid this next spreading activity by this insecticide just by leaking out in the transport or storage facility. So that is the responsibility of the transport agency or the owner. Then rule number 36 is related to the conditions to be specified for storage of insecticides. So all the insecticide should be placed in a well built, dry, well lit, and ventilated and of the sufficient dimension premises or the rooms. So the rooms which are available for storing this insecticide should be well ventilated and dry, because after contacting to the moisture or less oxygen or air, the properties of this insecticide may be changed. Then chapter 8 is related to the provisions regarding protective clothing, equipment and other facilities for workers during manufacturing, etc. for insecticides. So this is nothing but the provisions related to the protections. So that may be a medical examination, that may be a first aid measures, that may be a protective clothing. So medical examination, any person showing symptoms of poisoning shall be immediately examined and given proper treatment. Then first aid measures. So if you see some symptoms, if you see some contamination of this insecticide or the entry of these insecticides into the body of a person or the animals, then you should go for the first aid measures or first aid treatments. So the workers also should be educated regarding the effects of this poisoning and the first aid treatment to be given. Then 39 is related to the protective clothing. So persons handling insecticides during its manufacture, formulation, transport, distribution or application shall be adequately protected with appropriate clothing. The protective clothing shall be used wherever necessary in conjunction with respiratory devices as laid down in rule number 40. So normally when the insecticide is enters through the respiration systems, for that purpose or to avoid these things, we have to use a respiratory type of personal protective equipment. That may be a gas mask, that may be a self-contained breathing apparatus, or that may be a aerator systems. The protective clothing shall be made of materials which prevent to resist the penetration of any form of insecticide formulations. So the material of that protective clothing or apron in such a way that these insecticides can't penetrate these protective clothing, and we have to avoid the contamination of these insecticide under the apron or that protective clothing. That may be on the normal shirts, pants or trousers, or that may be on the hairs or any part of a body. So that should be avoided, and that is why the material of protective clothing should be selected with a good quality and resistance to that insecticides. Then a complete suit of protective clothing shall consist of the following dresses like protective outer garments, overalls, hood, hat, then rubber gloves or such other protective gloves extending halfway up to the forearms, made of materials impermeable to the liquids, then dust proof goggles, boots, etc. So these are the different types of personal protective equipment which should be used while handling these insecticides to avoid the contaminations, to avoid the contact directly. Then this is the rule number 40, which is clearly mentioned in the rule number 39, that the respiratory type of PPEs are mentioned under rule 40. So for preventing inhalation of toxic dust, vapors, gases, the worker shall use a following type of respirator or gas mask suitable for the purpose. Because depending on the chemical characteristics, depending on the chemical concentration, so that insecticide or pesticide may be converted into dust, may be converted into vapors, may be converted into gases, depending on the chemical characteristics as well as depending on the geographical conditions and weather conditions. So if the summer season is there, temperature is more, then some of the insecticides are going to convert into vapors or gases easily. But that should not be the case in the winter season. But humidity may be more, and due to humidity, some other issues related to the respiratory tract are different. So that is why we should use these respiratory devices while handling these types of insecticides. So that may be a chemical cartridge respirator. So this is nothing but a respirator where adsorbents are used. So the chemicals or the insecticides which can be adsorbed by a particular chemical, that should be acts as a adsorbent. It means when you are using this chemical cartridge respirator, that cartridge is nothing but a chemical adsorbent, so which is going to handle or which is going to adsorb that insecticide components, and fresh air is going to inhale by that person. Then supplied air respirator. In this case, we are going to supply more air and artificial air to that person, because sometimes in the working environment the chemical components or the insecticides are there, and due to these components the air molecules are less. That is why we have to supply more air with the help of this supplied air respirator. Then demand flow type respirator. So depending on the air requirement, depending on the oxygen requirement, we have to supply the airflow. So we can adjust this airflow depending on our demand. That is why it is called as demand flow type respirator. Then full face or half face gas mask with canisters. So these are the gas mask type of PP, which may be a full face, that may be a half face, and sometimes it is assisted by the airline or assisted by the oxygen line. So depending on the conditions, again we have to use these types of respiratory devices. Then 41 is related to the manufacturers, etc., to keep sufficient quantities of antidotes and first aid medicines. So if you are using the highly toxic chemicals as insecticides, then we have to give a first aid treatment immediately, and that is why these first are mandatory for. And if the accidents are industry, that may be inhaled, that may be digested, or some of the insecticides having the property that they can into our body through the skin. And this frequency, if it is more, then you have to keep the sufficient quantities of antidote in your premises. Then training of worker is again essential because each and every worker is not knowing about the insecticide. They are not knowing about the hazards. They are not knowing about the health hazard, explosivity hazard, fire hazards, etc. They are not knowing about the threshold limit values or LC50, LD50 values of these insecticides. And in case of contact, in case of insecticide entry into your body, what should be done? All these things are necessary while handling, while storing, while packaging, etc. And that is why training is essential for the workers who are working in these insecticide industries. Then 43 is related to the aerial spraying operations. Now, if you observe the news from last decade, then there are various accidents happen in the farming sector that they are using these aerial spraying operations, and due to the high toxicity materials, there are fatality cases in the agricultural areas also. That is why uh, we must take utmost care for this spraying mechanism, and the precautionary measures or the safety measures before starting this spraying mechanism or operations. So the aerial applications of this insecticide shall be subject to the following provisions. That is, marking of the area shall be the responsibility of the operator. The operator shall use only approved insecticides and their formulations at approved concentration and height. In some of the cases, it is happen that the operator is using that particular insecticide only, but the concentration may be different one. So you have to observe, you have to inspect these types of concentrations. And then washing, decontamination, and first aid facilities shall be provided by the operator. So sometimes it is contaminated on air, contaminated on the nearby area, contaminated on the properties which is nearby that area where the spraying operation is going on. So decontamination should be done with the help of water and washing facility. In case if animals or human beings are contaminated by these insecticides, then first aid facility, first aid treatment should be given by the operator. All area operations shall be notified to the public not less than 24 hours in advance through the competent authority, so that the people can be planned accordingly. If the animals are there, if some properties are there in that area where the spraying mechanism can be done, then they can be isolated all these animals, persons, or the properties which can be contaminated from that area. That is why this 24-hour intimation is essential again. Animals and persons not connected with the operation shall be prevented from entering such areas for a specific period. And the pilots shall undergo specialization training, including clinical effects of the insecticide. So, training is again an essential criteria for these types of operations in our farming sector. The farmers are not trained for these aerial spraying operations as far as these insecticides are concerned. Some farmers are using masks, some farmers are not using masks, some farmers are not going to judge, not going to check the weather conditions, what exactly the air direction is, what exactly the temperature condition is, what should be the height of that atomizer or the spraying mechanism or that pipe system, etc. So all these things should be studied by that operator, which is not the case in India. 44 is related to the disposal of used packages, surplus materials, and washing of insecticides. So, after utilization, all these packages should be disposed of in a proper way. So it shall be duty of the manufacturer that the formulators of insecticides, operators to dispose packages or surplus material and washing in a safe manner so as to prevent the environmental or water pollutions. So to avoid the contamination in the soil, to avoid the contamination in the water, it is the duty of manufacturer to dispose these packages or surplus material in a safer way. The used packages shall not be left outside to prevent their reuse. The packages shall be broken and buried away from the habitations. So these are the different guidelines for packaging, for utilizations, for spraying operations, etc. Thank you. So this is all related to the insecticide rule 1971.